the one time he had a guest on who claimed to killed a Bigfoot, him and his two buddies.
I remember that.
Yeah. And, Art's really believed that happened because the guy supplied him a map, a whole bunch of stuff. But then what Art told me is the guy was paranoid about, because he realized what they did, thought if it could be proved half human or not, he was scared that he might end up, being locked up the rest of his life. I don't think that would actually have happened, but he was scared. And Art really believed the guy to the point that he went way overboard to help the guy. And, if you remember that story, it really makes sense because to take down a Bigfoot, you're not going to do it with one gun. You're not going to do it with a 38. You're not going to do it with a 45 or a 30-06. Because I just remember when I was a kid, my uncle went out bear hunting and he shot a bear. And then the bear decided to charge after him because it wasn't a kill shot. He shot the bear 3 or 4 times. And the story short is that my uncle almost died. He was in the hospital for well over a month or more, recovering from all the wounds from the bear before the bear died. So can you imagine something like that with a bear versus something that's even bigger, it'd be crazy to go out there. I will say this. I've had another guy on my show that goes out looking for a Bigfoot. And I said, okay, well, do you carry any protection? He goes, yeah, I got a 6-inch knife. And then I look at him. He's just as dumb as the other people that want to go out and kill one. Because if you did run, not just, a Bigfoot, how about a cougar or a mountain lion, depending on where you live? You think that 6-inch knife is going to protect you?
Yeah, it's, I think if one of these things decides to get you, you're gotten. I think in the case of your encounter, if it wanted to get you, it would have gotten you, I think it was trying to scare you away more than anything else.
It did a good job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I think if these things want to get you, they will absolutely get you. And I would advise people against taking shots at them. I think that's a really bad idea. I think, especially because, so the story goes, if you see one, there's a couple more that you're not seeing, that are right in the area. So if you shoot the one, you might have more to deal with very, very quickly. And, also you don't know what it is. It's not a good idea, I don't think, to take a shot at anything that you really don't know what it is. You wouldn't, any good hunter would go out and shoot at something when he didn't have a good bead on it and actually know what it is. Oh. And it's a bad idea. And then the other thing, I've collected stories where people touch them, and that's a big no-no. If you're close enough to touch them, I wouldn't reach out and try to touch the thing because that seems to be when they go nuts so often. Some people said, I've heard other stories where people said they've been able to touch them and it's been fine, but quite a few stories that everything seems to be fine and somewhat calm, and then they touch them, and that's when things go really bad.
Well, it can go from the standpoint you don't have an arm left if you touch them, or you could be one of the missing in the national forest that, back up to 4 years ago, there was like 14,000 some hundred people that had gone missing since 1900 in the national forest, unaccounted for. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know if I would want to, entice or do anything with a Bigfoot, try to be friendly with it or what, because you don't know how it's going to go if you do run across one.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're very unpredictable. And this is all based on witness testimony, it's really all we have. But, I go into this, other than footprints. We've got some good footprint casts and some questionable hair, but really witness testimony is the main body of what we have. And I do believe them because they're consistent. They're consistent throughout time. The reports that I have from the 1800s sound just like the reports that I get today. So I think there's a consistency in reported behavior with these creatures. So I do put some great weight on witness testimony because, again, that's all we have. But the witness testimony, would suggest that these creatures they're easy to anger, they're unpredictable, and they sort of have a culture of revenge. They are not above if you live close, following you home, and then you got real problems.
Well, I wouldn't want one following me home, but we don't. Again, a lot of times, what I've heard from witnesses that say they have run into a Bigfoot, they start talking about portholes and all these things that that they've seen things come out, and all of a sudden there's a Bigfoot. I'm just wondering if that's associated with it. Is there such thing as portals? That they go in and out, maybe travel from one universe to another. I don't know. But you hear all these people talking about this stuff, and it just makes me, to sum it up on my standpoint, you're not going to find a Bigfoot walking in a campground, going in the woods for a 10-minute walk. I was out in the middle of nowhere. They haven't probably had people in there since after World War II where we're at. Not many tourists, I guarantee you, would not travel where we went. I mean, that was way out in the middle of nowhere. And there's no towns around there. There's no nothing. So, I mean, the odds are when you go out someplace very secluded is where you're going to have more chance, I think, to run into something.
Yeah, I mean, I do think they're, unfortunately, for people who don't want to hear it, I do think they come closer than people might be comfortable with, and more frequently than people might be comfortable with. And this, again, is just based on the number of reports I've gotten from areas where I'm like, what? You saw it where? And I mean, there was one I investigated. It was in a neighborhood, but if you followed from where the witness saw it in the back of their yard, you could follow a sort of avenue of woods from there all the way to the river, to the local Susquehanna River, several miles, probably 5 miles, but it's basically one straight avenue of woods that would have had to cross like one rural road and one field, I think one kind of farm field to do that. So, there were ways to get in and out of there. If, and that's if we're thinking of it as a natural creature. I have my questions because there's another area here. It's 8 square miles. I have reports going back to the 1800s, several reports, and on up into really 2014 was the latest report I got from the area. And just a crazy amount of reports. I wrote about this in a book called Wood Knocks, a series of Bigfoot articles by different authors that David Weatherly's published. It's in volume 3, but it's 8 square miles, and there's no possible area for there to be a breeding ground for these creatures there. It just wouldn't make sense. It doesn't. There's no area. You just couldn't host a breeding population of Bigfoot in this area and have them go unseen. So it comes to a question of, are they moving through the area in some regular basis, or what? I have no clue why they're being seen there, but it's a rural area, but it's not wilderness by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of farmland and some woods and so forth. But again, it's 8 square miles, and of course the other thing that I find there is UFO reports and tons of ghost reports and everything, all kind of packed into this little 8 square mile area. So it's very strange, and it almost becomes things like portals. Now, I've never, I don't know how much weight to give that, but they almost become as logical as a natural creature at some point, because you just look at the idea of there being a breeding population in this one little area in York County, Pennsylvania, and I shake my head and say, no, it can't be.
I don't know. That's the whole thing. Is that is something like what we discovered that time up there in the Canadian Rockies? Was it a Bigfoot, or was it something else that automatically, because, growing up from a little kid, you hear the name Bigfoot. You've seen movies on Bigfoot. Even before the internet, believe me, because I'm old as you can get and still survive. And I remember as a little kid, movies coming out about, a Bigfoot and all that stuff. The guy that used to play Cheyenne, Bodie, that Western show, did a movie about Bigfoot up like supposedly in Washington, where it was actually grabbing people and eating them. And you remember those like little things when you're young, and then all of a sudden you see something, and I don't know. That's just it. Is it something other than Bigfoot that it makes you think it's a Bigfoot, or or why? I don't know. I'm just so confused on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the honest answer, really. I don't know. And that's, if you press me, that's all I can tell you is I don't know. I'm extremely fascinated by it, and I will continue to pursue it. I went through a month of depression a few years back where I realized I'm probably not going to solve this in my lifetime. It's probably going to be it's been a mystery that's, I like to say Bigfoot has lived in the woods next to us for as long as we've been keeping records. And it's absolutely true. There's, the folklore and so forth. It's always been there, and we haven't solved it yet. So I think the chances of us solving it are probably pretty slim. I think we can get closer and we can ask different questions, but you have to be willing to accept that you might not ever get the real answer. But I'm still completely fascinated by it.
Well, the other aspect, people say, okay, well, if they exist, how come we're not finding skulls or we're not finding, bones? Now, there's two things. One is people say, well, gee, if one gets killed or dies, they remove, the body. The other is when you're out in the middle of the woods and stuff, even a human being, if they die out there, when they do find their body, they don't find much because, scavengers come, coyotes, wolves, cougar, and they drag off various parts of a human body. So I think that he would even fall under what, Bigfoot?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely could. Especially in the Northwest, I think they were saying like a body just decomposes incredibly quickly in the forest there.
Yeah, and like I said, what doesn't decompose is probably drug off by various animals to eat. But
sure, yeah.
So anyway, why don't you start a little bit about your one book in Pennsylvania, a little bit about it, and then we'll go into the one here on the West Coast and the difference between, what you on the books.
Yes. So thanks for Pennsylvania. Just that after my first book, I noticed I was digging up these old newspaper reports. And again, my first book was really just about York County and Pennsylvania, and two counties on either side, to the east and to the west of York County, Lancaster and Adams County. And I found so many historical Bigfoot reports. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So I just decided, and I thought it was going to be the whole country. I thought, well, I'm going to do a book on these historical reports from across the country. And very quickly, starting with Pennsylvania, I realized, I'm going to have a whole book that's just Pennsylvania. There's so many of these historical reports. They didn't call him Bigfoot. Bigfoot, that name came in the 1950s and really didn't enter pop culture probably until 1970 or so. They called him wild men. And the problem with that is they also would call, if a mountain man came out of the woods and he had, long hair and didn't look like, the people in the town, they'd call him a wild man. Also, if there was a crazy person running around, itinerant or something, they call them wild men also. So you have to kind of sort out which seems to be the 8-foot tall hairy creatures and what seems to be the normal humans. They're just calling wild men. But wild men is what they called them. And again, I found so many reports that I was able to do a whole book just on Pennsylvania. And I'm in the process. I'm going to do the whole country. I'm breaking it down in regions. The second book was West Coast Wild Men. That was California, Oregon, and Washington State. And then I'll probably do the rest of the East Coast in another book, I believe. And then different regions from there. I'll do one for the South and so forth. So these are all reprinted, actual reports from the 1800s on up to the 1920s.
Oh, wow. How hard was it for you to find the info? I mean, how much research and how long did you put into it?
Oh, I every night I'm researching, and again, most of it is, like I said, determining what is, a natural human and what is something else they're talking about. And a lot of that comes down to either, like I said, the behavior, if it matches the behavior of something, these modern Bigfoot reports. Sometimes it's the description. and sometimes there's some that are in question. There's some that I'm like, well, I'm not sure if that's a human or not. If it speaks and if they caught it and they took it to jail, I tend to think,